Amen. As you're being seated, how many of you believe that Jesus is more than enough? He's all we need. There are times in our life we feel like, I need something else. But when you read with me today the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, it becomes incredibly obvious. He can do so much with so little that we offer. This miracle is in the series Believe because, listen to these three things. When you believe, you see people differently. Belief changes the way you see people. Belief changes what you do, especially when you're in a trial or when you're in a dilemma. And belief changes what you get. We'll never see the miraculous power of Jesus until we believe, because it'll change what we get. So this is the only miracle that is recorded in every gospel that Jesus did on this earth. Think about it. His resurrection, yes, that's in every gospel because that is the centerpiece of our faith. But the only miracle that he ever did that is recorded by all four gospel writers is this one. Now, if I'm just trying to think what Matthew was thinking and what Mark was thinking and Luke and John. If I were going to pick a miracle that I wanted to make sure I told the story about Jesus, I would have picked when he raised Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 11. I would have picked maybe Jairus' daughter. You remember the little girl that was 12 years old that died, and he raised her back to life. But why this miracle? And I don't know the answer, and there's not an exact answer. The scripture doesn't tell us why this particular miracle. But I have an idea of maybe why, and it has to do with the song we just sang. Because I think it is one of the most beautiful pictures of Jesus' sufficiency, of being more than we could ever need. So with that in mind, I want you to go to the Gospel of Mark. We could go to any gospel on this one, but the Gospel of Mark. And the reason, obviously, we're in a series in Mark, so it's going to be the source, the main text for us. But John's Gospel is a great one to read maybe later on today, tomorrow, this week, because it tells a lot more of the story and kind of gives you some ideas and things that Mark doesn't. But in the story, here's the problem. Let me just kind of walk you through what's going on. Jesus has received the disciples back. They've been on a mission trip, literally. He sent them out. They've come back. And he calls them apostles. This is the first time the word apostles is used for the disciples. And the reason is that an apostle is someone sent. And you don't call somebody something until they've done it, right? You don't call anybody a missionary until they've been on a mission trip. Or you really don't call somebody a follower of Christ if they're not following Christ. So here, they're called apostles. They come back. Jesus senses they need to rest, which I think is awesome. It's a whole nother sermon for another day, but isn't it awesome that he knows you need to take care of the body? You need to take care of yourself. And so Jesus says, I want you to come away, and they go to a desolate place, okay? In fact, the word desolate place used 3 times. They go to a desolate place, and then all of a sudden the crowd shows up. It's as if the boat was moving on the Sea of Galilee and the crowd was moving with them, just waiting for that boat to come to land because Jesus' fame was so widespread. So now they got a problem. They're tired. They're busy. They hadn't even had time to eat. And so Jesus sees this crowd and he asks the disciples, what are we going to do? And the disciples say, well, let's send them away. Let's tell them to go get food. And Jesus says, no, you feed them. And it was in that context that Jesus does the miracle that may be the greatest of all, because every gospel writer witnesses it. And I want to tell you about those situations in your life when you don't know what to do. When you have an impossible situation. when you don't know what to do and it looks like the odds are against you, I want you to remember, God allows those for two reasons. Number one, your growth. Number two, His glory. Can you say that with me? Our growth, His glory. Say it again. Our growth, His glory. And in this miracle, in this dilemma, both of them are true. The disciples see something they've never seen. Their faith was so enlarged. And then He was glorified. So with that, I want you to look with me. We're going to start in verse 30, chapter 6 of Mark. The apostles returned to Jesus. They told Him all that they had done and taught. And He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a little while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So in other words, they're really, really stressed and busy. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place. By the way, the word desolate means desert. It just means it's barren, literally. It's a barren area, a place by themselves. Now, many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So they're anticipating where this boat is going to pull in. When He went ashore, He saw a great crowd, and He had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And He began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, the disciples came to Him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy something to eat." And He answered, "You give them something to eat." Now let's just stop there for a moment. When you believe, it changes the way you see people. The disciples saw them as kind of a messy situation. How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to feed everybody? Jesus saw them and had compassion. He doesn't miss anybody. And in case you're wondering, yes, He sees you this morning. And He has compassion. Especially for anyone in this room that's feeling lost, like without a shepherd. He calls them sheep without a shepherd. The word for compassion is the noun form of the verb splankna. It's to feel with your guts. It's to feel something way down inside. That's how Jesus sees them. And he is touched. So the disciples, they want to send Him away. You know, last week when Danny filled in, and I want to say thank you to Danny for doing an incredible job and just talking about how the gospel spreads and it's chaotic sometimes. And he announced and mentions that we're looking into a multi-site, another campus, and it would be out west in the Horizons West, the area that it's called Hamlin, actually, New Independence Parkway, where it runs into 429. There's a section of 429 there. Just it's growing tremendously. And so we have been thinking and working on this for a year or so, actually 18 months. And when we drove out there, we got on a bus. All the pastors got on a bus, and a couple of the developers took us out there. It'd been a long time since I'd been out there. Actually, we looked for a house out there when we first got here 12 years ago in 2005. We looked for a house, and we found one that I love because it was away from everybody. I mean, it was back in the woods. And I said to my wife, "What do you think?" She goes, "I don't like it." I said, "Well, it's out away from everything. It's away from everybody." And she goes, "That's why I don't like it. It's out away from everybody." I mean, there was nobody out there. Now, when we were on that bus and we were riding through, all of a sudden I saw differently. I saw people everywhere. And I didn't see churches. And so we have identified this area as being an area of need and an area that we feel like that we could be a part of a gospel witness in that area. So what I'm saying is, when you believe, you start looking at Orlando differently. You start looking at people differently. Not in a bad way, but in a good way. I remember when my life changed and I came back to Christ, I turned from thinking, when people have a problem, that's your problem. Now, all of a sudden, I wanted to do something about it. And so here's Jesus. He sees the people. He goes to the disciples, and the disciples are saying, "Well, we need to get rid of them. They need to go get their own food." Ministry's messy. It's not a clean thing. I don't know how we're going to meet this need. I don't know how we're going to do this. But that's okay because that's the nature of ministry. Now, what I say, belief changes how you see people, but it also changes what you do. So Jesus tells them, you get them something to eat. Now watch what happens here. He said, you go give them something to eat, verse 37. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go see. And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. So the disciples, their response was, we've done the math. Evidently, there was an accountant, one of the 12 disciples, and he goes, well, we've done the math, and there's no way we can do it. John's gospel tells us it was Philip. He goes, there's no way we can do it. It'd take 200 denarii to feed these people some bread. Do you know how much 200 denarii is? We don't use that currency, so it's kind of hard to know. It's your year's salary. It's a year's salary. So think about if you were on vacation, a bunch of people showed up, and your husband or wife said, honey, let's spend our year's salary on them, and let's try to help them. How well would that go? That's exactly what's happening. Now, here's what's interesting. How many of us, just like the disciples, when there's a need, we ask our money rather than asking God what we should do? You remember when Jesus said you can only serve one master? Either you will serve God or mammon, which is money. Why would he say money? Because so many times it dictates what we can do. I mean, even this morning, you may say, well, you know, I'd love to use that. I called it PayPal in the first service. PushPay, I'd love to use PushPay, but my money won't let me. Quit listening to your money. Let your money listen to you. We've got to learn to tell our money what to do. All the staff just finished Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. We just went through it as a whole staff. I mean, everybody that works here was invited to go through this and to be a part. And we're going to lead the entire church through it in the year 2018. Because you know what it does? It helps you to learn that you own your money. It doesn't own you. You don't make decisions asking your money what to do. You ask God what to do. And so here, the disciples are like, we can't do it. I've been in churches. I've been around people all my life. We can't do it. We don't have the money. We don't have the money. But did God tell you to do it? Well, then do it, and God will provide. Well, in this case, they said 200 denarii, not sure. Then Jesus says, go find out how many loaves you got. You see that? Go find out how much bread you got out there. Go and see. Now, how many of you think Jesus really was clueless? He didn't have a clue how much bread was out there. You know better than that. Jesus knew exactly. And they went, and here's the grand total of what they found. 5 loaves, 2 fish. 5 loaves, 2 fish. Now, I know you're thinking loaves maybe being big old wad of bread like that. Nope. French bread, big old roll? Nope. Little bitty rolls. That was a loaf. And the fish, man, I'm thinking, you know, big old slab of filet, you know, some maybe they call it an amberjack out there or something, or tuna or whatever. Nope. The best equivalent is sardines. Sardines in a can. How many of you like sardines? Raise your hand. Can we just stop and pray for y'all right now? Y'all are messed up. I saw who you are. You're messed up. That's the nastiest food. Somebody told me, said, well, put mustard on it and it helps. Well, I can eat this table if it's got mustard on it or something. You don't even have to know how to swallow when you eat sardines. They just slide down. You don't do anything. Nasty. The fish were little bitty fish, and they were like that, okay? So 2 fish, 5 loaves. And they said, this is it. Now John's gospel, what's interesting, when John's gospel tells his story, it says that Andrew, the disciple Andrew, found that lunch, 5 loaves, 2 fish. And where did he find it? You remember? A little boy. The word used for a little boy in the Greek is only used one time in the New Testament, right there in John's Gospel, chapter 6. And it is a word that's what's called a double diminutive. A diminutive is a word that is a smaller version of something, like little is a diminutive. It's a double, meaning little child. This kid could have been 6 years old, 5 years old. And he's got a lunch with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. So you know if he's a little boy, he doesn't have a big old strapping lunch. He's just got 5 loaves, 2 fishes. Can you imagine what that conversation was like when Andrew walked up to him and sees food and says, "Son, can I have your lunch?" How well do you think that went? "Son, can I have your lunch?" The little boy looks up and said, "Well, why?" "My mama said that you're a stranger and there's danger. I'm out of here." And can you imagine when the little boy said, "Why?" And well, there's a man over here and he's going to feed everybody. There are 5,000 men, not to count the women and children. This little boy, I don't know who he was, but he offered it up, or Andrew took it. One of the two. We'll find out one day in heaven. And then Andrew shows up. What do you think went through Andrew's mind when he brings that to Jesus? I bet the other disciples were laughing. They were like, "Are you going to take that to him? You think 5 loaves, 2 fish is going to feed all these people?" So I don't know what he thought, but he had to think, well, you know what? I've seen Jesus do miracles. I've seen him do incredible things. And I don't know, maybe he could take this and do something with it. You see, I think the reason Jesus wanted to know is because he wanted them to realize how little they had and how awesome he is. I mean, I don't need to remind you this morning, we don't bring anything but a little lunch. We're all just a bunch of little lunches, right? But you see, God takes us. He takes what he has, what is available, what we offer him, and he does incredible things. Man, it doesn't take a big person or a big place to do big things, just a big God and people who believe in him. So when you believe, you do things differently. And so here's Andrew. He brings this lunch, and he gives it to Jesus. And then Jesus does something amazing. Look what he does. "And when they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Verse 39, "He commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven. He said a blessing, and he broke the loaves. And he gave them to the disciples to set before the people, and he divided the 2 fish among them all." So picture this. Jesus has these loaves, and he breaks them. He first looks up to heaven, and he says this beautiful blessing. We don't know what it was, but it was very customary for Jews to have a blessing before the meal and after. Did you know that was the custom? That was the way that they were taught through the law, is to give thanks and have a blessing before and after. I've had many meals, I've had a blessing before, and I needed one after it. You know what I'm talking about? And I should have. But he took this bread, he looks up, and then he breaks it. And he hands it to the disciples. Now, if you'd have been a disciple that day, and he broke one of the little fish apart, and he handed you half a sardine, and half a little roll, a little dinner roll, let's say, half a dinner roll, and you were to turn and go to 5,000 people, what are you going to do? They did it. Why? When you believe, it changes what you do. They may not have understood what he was going to do, how he was going to do it, but they did what he said. So how many people did Jesus feed that day? No, not 5,000. He fed 0. The disciples fed them. Why? Because they believed. Jesus is the beginning of the miracle, but miracles happen in obedience as we walk with him, as we do what he says. Just like when he turned the water into wine, it was when the servants took the wine to the master, the water to the master. You see, I think it's a cool thing. One of our pastors pointed this out. He said, I think it's obedience that accomplishes the great work for God. Yes, he's the source. Jesus was the source. But these disciples believed. So I don't know what the conversation was as they were going. One of our pastors, we were talking about this. He said, can't you imagine the disciples walking up to a crowd, 100 people sitting down and going, take small bites, take small bites. I mean, what else were you going to say? But somehow, miraculously, when you would take the bread and you pull a little bit off for you, it's like it's still there. Maybe that's how he did it. I don't know. I just know when you believe, it changes what you do. Why? Because you believe him. And what else? When you believe, it changes what you get. Look what happens to this. The very next verse, verse 42. And they all ate and were what? Satisfied. You got to be kidding me. Everybody ate. 5,000 men plus women and children all ate from 5 loaves, 2 fishes, and they were satisfied. Were there any teenagers there that day that wanted seconds? I mean, come on, where's the hunger? They're satisfied. And not only that, this is the most amazing thing. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. There were leftovers. 12 baskets full. How? This is what has so amazed me about this miracle. I'll be honest, I've always taught this miracle from the standpoint of little becomes much in God's hand. You give him a little, he multiplies it. I don't think that's the central truth of the miracle. I was flying back. Rachel and I got to go to Denver. And guys, the church we planted there is doing phenomenally well. Our child is doing great. What an amazing thing. Give the Lord praise. Oh, my goodness. The leadership, Ben Mandrell's pastor, Doug Pierce, worship leader, and so many of our people are there. And it was just so good to see. Rachel and I were there on last Sunday, and they're running 700 people. I mean, my goodness, the church has only been there like a year and a half. And think about it. That's 700 to 800 people who were not in a fellowship or in church necessarily there. So now they have a place. And you know what's cool? They are starting a church. They're planting a church in a place called Stapleton, which if you've flown into Denver for very long, you know the airport used to be at Stapleton. That was the name of the airport, actually. Developers have taken Stapleton and created like a Baldwin Park kind of thing, like a celebration at Disney. They've created this incredible area and developed it. And so we saw that, and we felt moved that might be a place to plant the church. But then we saw Arvada, and that's where God spoke to us. But now the church we planted is going to start a church in Stapleton. We're going to have a grandbaby. And I think that's pretty awesome, isn't it? I mean, just to think about that, how that works, that's how the gospel works. You plant a church, you share, and then they share, and it just spreads exponentially. So when we were coming back, I was looking at this. I had this text. I was sitting on the airplane. I was up against the wind, and Rachel was in the middle seat. And somewhere between here and Denver at 30,000 feet, God just showed me something. And I can't tell you how many times I've taught this text, how many times I've preached on it, taught it in seminary, and all of a sudden, it was like the Holy Spirit showed up on that plane and just said, David, look. You know what I think is the main truth here? You know why I think every gospel writer tells this story? Because this is a story about Jesus being more than we need. The miracle is not he can multiply stuff. The miracle is he is all we will ever need. Now watch this. Think about it. When he blessed that bread and they began to share it, and there were 12 basketfuls, I used to think that maybe the significance of this miracle is in the 12, because 12 is a big number, right? 12 disciples, 12 tribes. I mean, I'm thinking, well, maybe the idea is 12. No, I mean, 12 is a big number, but that's not the idea. The idea is there's stuff left over. There was more than enough that day. And I don't know if you caught it, but there are two images that I want you to see that are in the background. They're almost like the screensaver running, the wallpaper on this thing. Here they are. Number one, the shepherd feeding his sheep. You remember he said he saw the people and they were like sheep without a shepherd. And then all of a sudden the shepherd is there and he feeds them. And I want to show you something. I promise I didn't see it. I've not seen it in all my years. I've had guys last night that have taught this and preached this, and they came up to me last night and said, I've never seen that. I want to show you something. Verse 39. Then he commanded them to all sit down in groups on the, say it with me, green grass. Where did the green grass come from? This is a desolate place. He says it 3 times. It's a desert. It's barren. And yet Jesus, as a shepherd, has them sit down on the green. Where did the green grass come from? I'll tell you where it came from. It came from the same shepherd who makes his sheep lie down in green pastures. You see, Jesus can do for you what the world cannot do. You and I walk in a barren place. We live in a desolate place. But when we trust Him and believe, what do you get? You get green grass. You get places. You get things that God does that's beyond anything you could ever do. And I just think there's a shepherd picture here. There's a picture of Jesus standing there. And I don't know if they thought of it, but think about the 23rd Psalm. Think about what David the shepherd said. Remember what he said? The Lord is my shepherd. I don't need a thing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for Thou art with me. And Thy rod and Thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runs over, more than enough. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And one day, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever and ever. Let me tell you what I believe. We have a shepherd. His name is Jesus. He's all we need. He is more than enough for us. So I see that picture. And to think that He would use a child to demonstrate that. How much, David, when David wrote that psalm, he was a child. I think he was a young boy. He was a shepherd boy. And to think that one of the greatest miracles ever recorded, all 4 Gospels tell it, started with a little 6-year-old child. It's a simple truth, but it's a profound truth. Jesus is more than enough for you. He's more than enough for me. He's all we need. Now, Danny said last week there was something I was going to share with you that is kind of another thing we believe God wants us to do in 2018, and I want to share that with you. Guys, nobody loved children more than Jesus. Nobody honored and valued children. In fact, when He wanted to teach us about heaven, remember He took a child, stood the child there, and He said, except you become like a child, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. Remember that? There was a German schoolmaster who taught 8-year-old boys. And he would teach them all week. And then on Sunday, he would teach them at the church in this little village in Germany. And on Sundays, he would come in, he would take his little hat off, and he would bow to these boys. And one day, one of the boys asked, why do you bow to us? And he said, because God is going to use you to do great things one day, and I'll be gone, and I won't have the chance to honor you, so I will honor you today. You know who one of those boys was? Martin Luther, who led the Protestant Reformation, who on Halloween, as we're getting close to Halloween, you know, All Saints' Day, when Martin Luther on that night before nailed those 95 statements of truth to the door of the chapel in Wittenberg to say this is what we believe, and he led a reformation. That kid was there. I think about the children we have here. Are we honoring them? What can we do? Well, let's start with something real simple. Do our facilities say we value children? Well, they used to, but they're old. And now if you have children, you know you've walked those halls. It looks cool, and it was at one time really, really cool. But rather than a place to accommodate kids, let's have a place that attracts kids. Let's have a place that screams at parents, we love children and we value your children. Let's have a place that a kid wants to go to. So we're dreaming right now that in the year 2018, we can take that children's area and playground and we can do a complete renovation of it. And we can make it a place where children can come and learn stories just like the one we're teaching right now. And I'll tell you what brings this even closer to home is the little fellow that God gave us and our grandson. Look at this picture. This is Sawyer Bow. And when you look at that picture, you want to do anything you can to be a blessing to that little fella. But here's the picture I really want you to see. This is a picture that happened on Thursday afternoon. My mom is visiting. She's 88 years old. She's from Little Rock, Arkansas. I was in Lake Yale, the assembly ground there in Lake Yale, and I was getting ready to go up and teach. There was a gathering there of people from all over the state. And so I was about to stand up, and I get a text. So I looked down at it, and it was that picture. My response was, oh, my goodness. That is a great-grandmother with her great-grandson. Do you know what I see in that picture? I see the generation behind us reaching up for the generation ahead of us. And I see a responsibility of those of us who have gone before to make sure that those who come behind, we have something to give them, something of faith. You know the statistics are against us. With every generation, there are fewer and fewer believers. If it keeps going the way it's going, there will come a day when almost Christianity, there won't be any Christians. If you just do the pure math. But I don't believe in pure math. I believe in God's math. And I believe He called churches like ours to invest in children and to make a difference in the lives of kids. So next year, you're going to hear more about this later. I just think it's a way of remembering He uses children. It's a simple truth. He's more than enough for us. And then the other image is that image of when He took that bread. Because 1 year later, John says, in the Gospel of John, he said this happened at Passover. 1 year later at Passover, He would also take another loaf and He would look up and He would bless it and He would break it and He would say to His disciples, this is my, say it, body, which is given for you. You see, I think the picture in this miracle is His own body. I think when He broke that bread, it was a picture of Him giving Himself. He's the miracle. Look at what the Gospel of John says. Jesus went on to teach about Him being the bread of life. Look at these words. I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger. Whoever believes in me shall never thirst. I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. This morning, we're going to take the bread and we're going to take the cup. I do not believe this bread will turn into His flesh. I believe this bread points to His flesh. And this cup points to His blood. There is nothing about this morning that will save you. There is only one thing that saves, and that is what Jesus did on the cross 2,000 years ago. But this is the reminder. This points us back. And so consider this. Maybe the lesson of this miracle is that when Jesus gave us Himself, His body broken, He is enough. He's all we need. He not only saves us, He is enough every day of our life. He is all we need. He's more grace than you will ever need. He's more forgiveness than you'll ever call upon. He's more love than you will ever comprehend. He's more strength than you could ever ask for. He's everything. There is no deficit. There is no lack when Jesus is Lord. What an incredible thought. So in a moment, when we receive the bread and the juice. It's going to look like this. It comes in 2 cups. They're stacked. On the top one is the juice, and the bottom one is the bread. And I'm just saying, for anyone in this room who is a follower of Jesus Christ, you are a believer. If you're not at that point of belief yet, just let this be a time to soak in the truth. But to any believer in this room, I want you to receive this, and I want you to just hang on to it. And you're going to hear a song. It's called Grace to Grace. It's basically a song about abundant grace. It's a song that says we have everything. Jesus said, when he came, he said, I've come that you might have life and have it more, say it, abundantly. He wants us to have more extravagance. You remember what Paul said about God? To him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond all we ask or think. That's more than enough. Even the Gospel of John in the 1st chapter, this verse, say it with me. And from his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. You know what that phrase is in Greek? It means grace that never ends. Grace that overflows. So today we're going to hold this bread and this cup, and we're going to say together, Jesus, you're enough. You're more than enough. Father, would you bless this bread? Would you bless this juice? And would you teach us, just as you did that day in a desolate place? You are all we need. You are all we will ever need. Thank you, Jesus. You are more than enough for us. In Jesus' name.
If love endured that ancient cross, how precious is my Savior's blood. The beauty of heaven wrapped in my shame. The image of love upon death's frame. If having my heart was worth the pain, what joy could you see beyond the grave? If love found my soul worth dying for, how wonderful, how glorious, my Savior's scars, victorious, my chains are gone, my debt is paid, from death to life and grace to grace. If heaven now owns that vacant tomb, how great is the hope that lives in you. The passion that tore through hell like a rose, the promise that rolled back death and its stone. If freedom is worth the life you raised, where is my sin? Where is my shame? If love paid it all to have my heart, how wonderful,
Is there one that you've not received the bread and the cup? Just lift your hand. We don't want to miss anybody. Now I want you to stand with me, just with these cups together. The chorus that Lindsay just sang is the story of this miracle. Because I believe that the disciples, the night that he was betrayed, when he took the bread and he broke it, having blessed it, he broke it and he said, "This is my body." Do you think maybe that night they flashed back to the day he fed 5,000 plus? Do you think they saw, oh, that's what he meant? Well, whether or not they did, we do. Because today, we hold a cup and we hold bread that reminds us Jesus is more than enough. Grace to grace. Would you say the chorus with me? Let's say it aloud. How wonderful, how glorious. My Savior's scars victorious. My chains are gone. My debt is paid. From death to life and grace to grace. He said, as often as we eat this bread and drink this cup, we proclaim his death until he comes. This do in remembrance of Jesus. Eat the bread and drink the cup. And let's worship him.
How wonderful, how glorious, my Savior's skies, victorious, my chains are gone, my debt is paid, from death to life, and grace to grace. When I see that cross, I see freedom. When I see that grave, I see Jesus. From death to life, I will sing your praise in the wonder of your grace. When I see that cross, I see freedom. When I see that grave, I'll see Jesus. From death to life, I will sing your praise in the wonder of your grace. How my soul will sing your praise in the wonder of your grace. How my soul will sing your praise. How wonderful, how glorious, my Savior's God, victorious, my chains are gone, my debt is paid, from death to life, and grace to grace.
From grace to grace, more than we'll ever need, overflowing, abundant, beyond our wildest dreams. If Jesus could take 5 loaves and 2 fishes and feed the multitudes, surely he is enough for us. Can we just give him praise and thank the Lord for who he is? This morning, if you didn't partake, you didn't take the cup, and you really, you just been thinking about it, we'd love to talk to you about that. We've got a response room. It's right over here. We've got folks ready to pray with you. If there's something else going on, just you're living a life and you're struggling, you're in one of those dilemmas, maybe it's your growth, his glory. God is wanting to show you how awesome he is, and we'll be glad to pray with you. We're going to have the band sing us out, and you're welcome to sing this chorus. This is a great song, by the way. But I want to leave you with these words. May you never forget, the Lord is my shepherd. I don't need a thing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though I have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And one day I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever and ever. God bless you. Have a wonderful Lord's Day.